Okay, Redline Challenge, Redline Challenge. Gotta keep it cheap, gotta keep it cheerful. $7, $7. Okay. Torino. That'll work. It says it's a Redline. Doesn't look like a Redline, but... ah, what the heck. Let's do it. Hey there folks, Chuck here, coming to you from sunny Sarasota, Florida, where I am staring at my microphone that does not have a microphone cord. So, since the show must go on, and I have a due date of Monday, which is 2 days from now, I'm going to be recording this on my cell phone, so please bear with the audio quality. So this is the Diecast OutKast Redline Challenge, and one of the things that I have noticed about this car now that it has arrived is it is not a Redline. It has the same paint job as a Redline, but it is not a Redline. So I had a word with Mr. Diecast OutKast himself, and he says it doesn't matter, and breaking the rules is part of what makes being a Diecast OutKast an outcast. So we're going to keep rolling with this. So as long as he's cool with it, let's boogie. So we know how the drilling goes. We'll just snap to the disassembly. This is my first real used Hot Wheels custom for the channel, and this one is quite used. It has been well played with, and looks like it visited the sandbox once or twice. But that's cool. We're going to give it a new lease on life, and I wasn't planning on using Redline wheels anyway, so snap to the stripped down, cleaned up version of the body, and that looks good to me. Oven cleaner, aircraft stripper, sonic cleaner, you know the drill. Snap to it. This car didn't have a roll cage, and I wanted it to be more of a NASCAR style car than the version that it originally was, so that meant finding a roll cage. Fortunately, I had this Dollar Tree NASCAR type vehicle, and it had pretty decent makings of a roll cage, so grabbed it and grabbed the Goodyear Eagle wheels off of this old Matchbox sort of Viper thing that I had in the parts bin and got to work. NASCAR cars do not have hood scoops, so I wanted to fill that in, and I am not happy with how this turned out. This was not the way to go about doing it. I thought, oh, I'll just put some styrene on the bottom and fill it in with some modeling putty and it'll be fine. But this modeling putty collapses. It's really only for like filling in stuff that has a really rock solid bottom on it. So I ultimately ended up going back over it with Milliput, but I wanted to show you this to show that I make mistakes and hopefully learn from them. Here we are fitting the roll cage in place. I was pretty happy with how this roll cage looked. It's, you know, for $1. And this thing came with like accessories too. I bought the stock car really just for the toolbox that came with it, because I was going to paint that up for a diorama and ended up using the roll cage out of it. And I'm very happy that it was available, and it's nice to have some spare parts to work with. Of course, it was really only the hint of a roll cage. It didn't really have the connecting pieces, and I wanted it to have the connecting pieces. So this is part of a plastic barreled Q-tip, cotton swab. Turned that into the support bar once I had done some test fits, and used some accelerant to get it in place. Filed it down smooth, used another piece of scrap styrene to connect the top. And not really because you're going to see it, but because I wanted to test out my skills on roll cage building and just see how some different materials worked. And I liked the Q-tip as a building material. It's obviously way too thick for a real roll cage, but you're not going to see it, and it was good practice for me. I chopped down the roll cage a little bit because it was a little tall, and set those pieces aside because I was going to use those later. They were the perfect thickness for the rear window bars. Here we are test fitting the Goodyears out of the Matchbox. They stuck out a little bit, which originally I liked, but then the more I looked at the reference material, the more I realized, oh, the tires don't really stick out that much. So I wanted it to be more like a NASCAR style stock car and not a dirt track style stock car, and wanted it to look, you know, well used and abused, like post race, like maybe it had a really rough run at Bristol or something. There were some obvious fitment issues as well. The tires were very big, and I wanted that because this Redline had very big rear tires and very small front tires. So the Eagles worked great for the rear and were a little big for the front. So that was a perfect fit for me, and it just meant taking the barrel grinder and widening out the wheel wells just a little bit. It also meant cutting the chassis because these tires were quite wide. So to get them to sit more inboard, I had to thin down the chassis a little bit, which was easily done with my micro saw. The casting lines on this were horrendous. Anyone who complains about the new Hot Wheels castings having bad quality has not spent a lot of time with the 70s castings, and with the round-handled needle files help, you can make a lot of things happen. Round-handled needle files. Round-handled needle files. Round-handled needle files. Still my favorite tool to say out loud. This was my first time experimenting with the jeweler saw, not to be confused with a coping saw, or a scroll saw, as I thought it was called. Yeah, it did not go great. I don't know why I felt the need to do this, but the more I looked at my reference materials, the more I realized that actual NASCAR stock car Torinos of the time did in fact have door panel lines, and it was really bugging me that this one didn't have door panel lines, so I thought it'll be simple to add some door panel lines. It was not. Yeah, I'm still learning. The backline was, of course, quite easy, and I had this scribing tool that does quick work of the soft pot metal that these things are made of once I had the guideline in place. The fronts were a little more difficult. I used a grinding wheel to make the curve, and it made almost the exact curve that I needed. But that was a lot tougher to freehand that line in. And fortunately, because I was building this as a rough race run vehicle, it helped hide how rank and amateur my panel line cutting was. So I gave it a few dents and dings using reference material from the Days of Thunder movie, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's just so wonderfully terrible and just a joy to watch. Everybody seems to be having a lot of fun in that movie, especially Michael Rooker. If you watch him, he seems like he is having the time of his life. So yeah, I gave it a few bangs along the bottom, making it look like it was trading paint on the passenger side. I usually weather the driver's side more, and this time around I thought, I'll do the passenger side, mix it up a little bit. The metal here is amazing how soft this metal is, because once you grind it, all it takes is 200 grit sandpaper to really smooth out the metal and make it look more like realistic dents. You can see here the tire fitment was still an issue. You can also see my silly attempts at filling in the hood were not working. I wanted to tweak the bumper a little bit, make it look like there was a little rubbing, because rubbing is racing. I also wanted to try highlights and lowlights, kind of some modulation underneath the paint. So I painted the underside of the car black to make a hint of shadow underneath the actual paint job, and ultimately it didn't really turn out that. I think that's just because I was using such an opaque paint for the bottom color. I know the car was originally red, but I really like the combination of blue and yellow, and I liked the yellow graphics, and I wanted to have this car be kind of white, blue, and yellow theme. I used this Tamiya tape. It's a 5mm tape for curves, and good grief, is this stuff beautiful to work with. Just absolutely a joy. It made perfect curves along the side of the car. I used the decals to set the initial curve and then masked everything off, and oh my gosh, where has this tape been all my life? It just turned so nicely on these tiny, tiny curves along the side of this little car. So I'm going to be a big fan of Tamiya tape from now on. I try to usually be Mr. Bang for the buck and save money where I can, and this time around I sucked it up and spent the money, and I'm really glad I did, because this tape turned out amazing. The only places where it messed up were operator error on my part, and as you can see, the lines came out perfectly. I was very happy with how they came out. Once the paint was dry and I put a clear coat on it, I used a gloss clear coat to help the decals set better, and it was time to stick the decals. So I started with the decals that I got from Second Chance Redline. They were absolutely beautiful. You use this white toner, which is a must when you're paying extra for these decals. I tried to match the 23 as best I could. Before I put the decals on, I ran a scan of them so I could imitate the 23 for the roof graphic that I wanted to have, because again, the original car didn't have a roof number, and I wanted it to have a roof number like an actual NASCAR stock car would. So it was some quick work in Photoshop, and I actually painted a piece of paper with the same blue and scanned it in, trying to get match to the blue paint job, and it came out close. It wasn't perfect, but it came out cleaner than if I had tried to eyeball the color myself, just because the monitor has a different color than the actual ink that would be printed, and I'm not cool enough to have a calibrated monitor, unlike my brother Justin, who I'm sure would know exactly what to do here. But I did the best I could, and I translated the 23 into a outline graphic, and again, because I was using a white backdrop, it was pretty easy to use the clear decal paper here. I also wanted to have the 23 in the headlights, like on all the reference photos of racing Torinos that I had seen, so I made little makeshift headlights and shrunk the 23 down. So in the final product, what you're seeing is actually not the casting headlights, but the decal headlights that I faked, and I think they turned out pretty well. I also struggled a lot with the sponsor originally, because I was trying to find yellow and blue sponsors, and really the only one I could find was IKEA, and as funny as that would be, I decided to go with a little food store that has a bit of a racing pedigree, but you don't really see on NASCAR stock cars too much, and every time I visit my brother Justin up in Knoxville, I always have to point out that we're going by a Food City. I just love that logo, and I love the name because it just sounds like something an old prospector would yell. Yeah, we're going down to Food City. Sorry, I could do that all day. I've actually made myself hoarse on trips to Tennessee because I yell it so much, because there's a lot of them around. So anyway, back to the decals. I used some of the sponsor decals that came with the kit because I just love working with white toner graphics, and wanted to fill this car up a little bit more, so I made some bonus graphics. I love the old Burger King logo, so I added that as a sponsor. There were a lot of vintage 70s graphics that I wanted to use, but ultimately I went with Burger King and with Food City. Food City! Again, those bars on the windows are the leftover rungs from the roll cage from the dollar store diecast, so save those pieces because they come in handy later. I kept the chassis pretty simple. It was very tough to find photos of actual stock cars underneath that had not been flipped over. So I went with other model builders, and it seems like gray is a very popular color for the chassis of cars of this era. So I went with gray and weathered it up with some street grime from Wilder and a lot of blackwash. Because again, I'm not going for old and rusty this time around. I'm going for race worn, which means lots of black rubber and road grime from being raced hard. The good thing about that Food City graphic was it covered up my atrocious job of filling in that hole for the hood scoop. Ultimately, I could be happier with how the misaligned hood turned out, but it's my first time really working with a jeweler saw, and I'm not going to judge myself too harshly on that. I learned this trick from Night Shift, who's an armor builder on YouTube, to simulate splatter and spray. Take some acrylic, I used tarnished black here to simulate sprayed up bits of rubber and dirt. Flick a toothpick with your paintbrush, and then use a little water to clear off where it doesn't belong. The bars for the front windshield were very simple. They were just the strips of masking tape. In fact, I used the same masking tape that I used to make the straps for the GTO and cut some more thin strips and put them on the inside of the windshield, and they did a good job of simulating the windshield bars. I wanted it to look like it had been trading paint with Navy Donnie Allison or something in the Hawaiian Tropic car. So I picked this red primer pencil from AK Interactive and added some paint chips along the side. Did a little touch up on the front of the hood to cover up the misalignment errors. Again, that was going to be covered up anyway. Because this was a freshly raced car, I could actually use the dry brushed silver. I think this was actually Vallejo oily steel to simulate freshly scraped metal, which was a nice diversion from my typical rusty chipped look. I used this AK Interactive gunmetal pencil to simulate exhaust stains on the quarter panel. I didn't have to do too much to the wheels. I just painted the insides with that Vallejo oily steel. I really like the Vallejo oily steel because it looks exactly like it sounds, and it creates this nicely weathered steel look for the center of the wheels. And then just painted the treads with tarnished black to make them look worn. I had this spare wheel from those American Graffiti diorama sets, and I just dip it in paint and rub it along the side to make it look like the rubbing from another car's tires. And the Doc's weathering powder, grimy black, comes back out to kind of add to the shading that I had started with the watercolor pencil from AK Interactive. I'm really liking the potential of those. I definitely have a learning curve to overcome with the pencils, and I'm thinking one of my future builds I'm going to try weathering with just the pencils. I picked up a few more since then, and I think it'll be really fun to play with. Also, remember when you're doing powders to lay down a paper towel if you're going to flip your car over, or you'll end up just grinding powder into the roof of the car like I did there, but fortunately it cleans off pretty well. And for some reason I didn't set my camera very well here, but this was the satin clear. I bought some satin clear coat instead of matte, so I'd have a third option when it comes to luster finishes. And I didn't want this thing to be too flat because the car would be shiny, but it wouldn't be super shiny after running a race, and I thought the gloss was too much and the matte was too flat, so the satin ended up being the Goldilocks just right. I did one more at a tire rubbing on the side. A bit more powder to tie everything together. This ended up being a little more heavily weathered than my initial goal, but I'm discovering that's kind of far for me, so I need to continue to work on my subtlety. I tried being cool like Sharon Tarshish and bending the axles to make them narrower, but these axles were really thick, and I am a ham-fisted hack, so I wasn't able to make that happen, so I ended up just cutting the axles and gluing them in place. And the finished effect is, it's fine, it rolls, but I'm showing you the warts and all of the build. Yeah, I had to refit a few things. It was not ideal, but it gets the job done. I did a little gloss effect on the fuel filler to make it look like fuel had been leaking out from the last refuel, and it was time to button everything up. Surprisingly, the misaligned hood still fit fairly well with using the center posts. I just had to make a little bit of a nick on it. Then it came time for the speed tape to make it look like the pit crew had done the best they could to hold the hood shut and continue the race after a little bit of Tony Stewart style rubbing. And with that, it was time to put a number on it and call it a day. I ended up moving my Flying Valiant decal because I liked it better over on this side of the car. And here again is what we started with, a very battered but still quite restorable sort of Redline Torino Stalker from 1974. Really like this casting. I'm a big fan of the later black paint job version that they have with the orange and red stripes, and I've got one of those that I've had for years, and I was able to pick up a set of those decals as well, and I might do a straight up restoration on that car, or maybe a restoration plus on that one someday. But here's what we ended up with: a well battered what if stock car post race. I'm relatively happy with how this one turned out. I was trying a lot of new things with this build, and it was fun to experiment, and I don't know what's going on with my turntable, but we're just going to keep using it because I'm on a budget and I want to save my budget for new paints to try new things. I've got another build coming up here with a 3 blind mice build coming up in a few days. I want to thank Diecast OutKast for hosting this event. It was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing what everybody else builds, and I'm going to get to cutting this really quick so I can meet the Monday deadline and get to work on the Nova, so I have that ready to go by Saturday. That one was a lot of fun to do as well, so stay tuned for that. I've also got an unboxing video coming up as well, with some cool stuff from TK Diecast and my friend Super West from here in Gainesville. Once again, I thank you for coming along with me for the ride. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.